Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull towards certain historical or spiritual figures, a deep reverence for beings who seem to embody a perfect sense of balance and wisdom? When we find ourselves loving and venerating these archetypes, even if we are not consciously aware that they represent what mystics call the middle way, we feel them calling us toward our own higher potential. This attraction is not a coincidence. It is because these highly aligned spiritual masters are resonating with a profound, subconscious knowing that is buried deep within us. They hold the symbolic key and the living representation of the ultimate path to true and lasting liberation. In the esoteric traditions and the heart of all true mysticism, you will invariably discover that there is a central archetype designed to represent this sacred middle way. The concept of the middle way is of paramount importance because it is the essential key to our own gnosis, our spiritual salvation, our psychological integration, and ultimately, our attainment of self-sovereignty. Because of its critical role in our evolution, this archetype of the balanced path is consistently portrayed as a kind of alchemical entity. It is a divine being capable of holding within itself all the disparate elements, all the conflicting energies, and all the chaotic impulses that we, as human beings, constantly experience. This archetypal figure does not suppress these forces, but has the unique capacity to hold them all in perfect equilibrium and then transmute them into the harmonious state known as the middle way. The very idea of there being a middle way inherently implies that there must be something on either side of that center. These are, of course, the extremes. Within the framework of spiritual alchemy, we would view these extremes as two poles of a single continuum. At one end of this spectrum, we have pure, unmanifested spirit. At the opposite end, we have dense, tangible matter. The entirety of the alchemical great work, the journey of the soul, takes place between and in regard to this fundamental spirit-matter continuum. Within this vast spectrum of existence, the middle way, and the guiding archetype that represents it, is the path of absolute sovereignty and liberation. It is the one that holds the sacred center point, the perfect integration and synthesis of those two powerful extremes. Therefore, you can accurately perceive the middle way as liberation itself, precisely because when we walk this path, we are no longer bound, blinded, or controlled by the seductive pull of either of the two polarities. Let us explore what happens when we fall into these extremes. If we travel all the way to the material end of the spectrum, becoming fully immersed in matter, we inevitably become addicted and attached to it. This attachment becomes so complete, so all-consuming, that we can no longer honestly claim to be acting of our own free will. Our choices are no longer our own. They are dictated by our cravings, our fears of loss, and our identification with the transient world. Once we allow ourselves to become completely fragmented, our consciousness divided and scattered entirely into the material realm, we are effectively placed into a state of profound spiritual amnesia. Imagine spirit being at the far opposite end of this continuum. When we are completely divorced from it, we suffer from a cosmic memory loss. We begin to believe that we are merely physical beings, isolated entities experiencing a purely physical realm. We convince ourselves that there is nothing beyond this earthly existence, and that our entire identity is confined to our ego, our personality, and our social masks. Consequently, we begin to view everything through the narrow lens of a purely material reality, with all the attachments, anxieties, and competitions that such a worldview entails. This is one end of the spectrum, a state in which we are completely lost in the identification with our physical body, a prisoner in a palace of our own making. Now, let us consider the other extreme. If we journey all the way to the spiritual end of this continuum and become lost in that polarity, we develop a deep rejection, a disdain, and even a palpable repulsion to the material world. We begin to see all things associated with the opposite end of the spectrum matter, the body, earthly life, as inferior, corrupt, or illusory. We will then exclusively favor and regard the spiritual as being infinitely more superior, more real, and more valuable than the material. This impulse, this powerful pull toward the ethereal, at the expense of the immanent, is an extreme in which we can also become completely lost. We become blinded by a different kind of light, and we lose sight of the holistic truth of the middle way when we are utterly consumed by this end of the polarity. This is the state where we view ourselves as being the higher self at the direct expense of, and to the great detriment of, our personal self, the human ego that is our vehicle for this incarnation. When we are lost in either of these two extremes, they manifest as entire belief systems, far more complex and dogmatic than what I am describing here. But if you trace any dogmatic belief system back to its ultimate roots, you will find that it is fundamentally bound to either the material or the spiritual in a perpetual battle against its opposite. The middle way is the sacred technology. It is how we perform the inner spiritual alchemy required to harmonize these two warring extremes, to bring coherence, balance, and profound integration to them. And when we successfully undertake this great work, we will witness that this alchemy creates not only a state of harmony, but a new reality where these two forces are taken and used constructively together, in a synergistic way, where they mutually benefit from one another. When spirit and matter begin to benefit from each other within our being, they are entering into a sacred union. There is always an archetype within esoterica and mysticism that represents this divine union and this sovereign path of the middle way. The sovereignty it offers is freedom from the blindness, the attachment, and the bondage that inevitably arises from being trapped in either of the extremes, either completely lost in our ego and in total amnesia of our heart's truth, that we are more than just a physical self, or completely lost in a spiritual disidentification, rejecting the very vessel of our experience. These two cosmic forces of spirit and matter can and will benefit one another if we consciously allow them to integrate within our body-mind-spirit complex. Throughout history, this archetype of the middle way has been represented by various figures. In past ages, it was embodied by the figure of Mithras. This principle has also been held with perfect clarity in Buddhism through the Buddha. In our current age, we most commonly recognize this archetype of the middle way through the figure of the Christ. If we examine the ancient wisdom of the Kabbalah and its tree of life, we find a perfect map of this concept. On either side of the central column, there are two pillars. These two outer pillars represent the extremes, and the teachings state that they max out. This is a symbolic representation of how, when we travel all the way to one extreme or the other, we reach a terminal point beyond which we cannot progress. They are finite, limited. Because they are maxed out, they are not truly free. Their state is not born of free will. The central pillar, the middle way, is what represents true free will. This central archetype always symbolizes free will, because if you possess any form of ultimate, unconscious attachment to either the spirit or matter pole of the continuum, you cannot legitimately claim to have free will. You are simply lost in an extreme, caught in a state of profound imbalance. Therefore, your behaviors, your patterns, your actions, and your thoughts are all merely expressions coming from the possession of that imbalance. That is not freedom. The middle way always represents an archetypal figure who can integrate both of these extremes and, in doing so, cultivate authentic free will. In this context, free will is not a given. It is not something we are automatically granted. Instead, it is something we all begin with as a seed of potential, but it is a potential that we must actively cultivate. Think of a seed that requires the proper nourishment of sunlight, water, and conscious care in order for it to fully blossom into its mature fruition as a beautiful flower. The same is true for our free will. It must be nurtured through conscious effort and balance. This is why we feel such love and reverence for these archetypes. We are drawn to these highly aligned spiritual beings, and we can feel them calling us into our higher selves because they are activating a deep memory within our subconscious. They represent the knowledge that they hold the symbolism and the living embodiment of that sacred path to liberation. It is the middle way that transcends the limitations of the two outer pillars, which cannot go any further. The central path, however, can travel all the way down into descension, and all the way up into ascension. This is a representation of the masculine and feminine hemispheres of our being, once they are brought into harmony and union. It symbolizes the power of being able to descend, which is a feminine quality, and to ascend, which is a masculine quality, without conflict. They are not fighting each other. So what you have is not just a representation of the middle way. You have a being who holds the full spiritual power to descend deeply into themselves, to meet themselves in the most intimate way. Just as water naturally flows to the deepest and lowest parts of the landscape, and just as water can seep downward where no other element can reach, We too have that profound power of dissension, just as much as we have the power to ascend when we are following and practicing the inner work necessary to cultivate the middle way. We are capable of going deeply into dissension, as well as deeply into ascension. Typically, in imbalanced belief systems, ascension and descension are pitted against one another. They are viewed as mutually exclusive extremes, just as ascension is often exclusively associated with the spirit polarity, while dissension is associated with the material or matter end of the spectrum. But these two magnificent forces are rectified, unified, and synthesized in the middle way, where they are no longer adversaries. There is freedom now. There is the freedom to descend into our experience, because we are not in resistance to it. We are not blinded by a spiritual disidentification with our humanity. We can descend into the wisdom of our emotional body, and descend into the temple of our physical vehicle. And from that grounded place, we can then ascend, and this is of critical importance. We need to be able to ascend because this is what ultimately ensures our spiritual sovereignty. We will never achieve true spiritual sovereignty if we do not value both descension and ascension equally. The reason for this is that ascension is highly valuable for our journey after this life, while descension is highly valuable for cultivating and preparing our body, mind, and spirit during this life and beyond. This integrated understanding is precisely why many people do not delve into the esoteric layers of reality. They do not truly value mysticism unless their soul has reached a point of readiness for this profound work in a given lifetime. Because of this, the path of the middle way is not something that should ever be pushed onto others. Rather, it is a deep, soul-level calling for an individual who is prepared to do the great work, to take the extremes, to see through the illusions and limitations of all the teachings laid out within those extremes, and then to rectify and harmonize them within their own being. This is truly the great work of our current age. What you will discover is that beyond these two extremes and the middle way, there are actually only two fundamental processes occurring. Those two processes are denial and truth. When we are in a state of denial, our minds will produce all sorts of cleverness, intricate philosophies, and complex justifications to hide the simple fact that we are in denial. When we have unconsciously chosen a path of denial and self-deception, we cannot be honest with ourselves. Therefore, we cannot be honest with others. Consequently, we cannot truly see others, because we cannot even see ourselves. This results in layers of distortion upon distortion. It is incredibly difficult to recognize that we are living in a distorted reality that requires clarification if we are lost in our own cleverness, because we will hide this fact from ourselves. We will begin to value things that are not about sincerity, about cultivating integration, and about walking the middle path. Instead, we will construct and defend beliefs that place an extremely high value on one imbalanced extreme over the other. Our choice of which extreme to fall into will often simply be based on our personal preference for a particular flavor of cleverness and denial. However, if we are truly sincere, then we have no interest in hiding things from ourselves and, by extension, from others. What we truly care about is accuracy and truthfulness, even if that truthfulness leads us to question if there is any absolute truth at all. We are not concerned with clinging to beliefs merely for the sake of feeling comforted or secure. Instead, we value truth itself, whatever that may be, and however much that truth may grow and evolve as we do. That commitment is called sincerity. So, we can see the structure, a middle way flanked by two extremes. And then, we can see that beneath this structure, there are just two paths, one of sincerity and one of cleverness. One is rooted in truth, the other is rooted in denial. The more we are able to be transparent with ourselves and, in turn, be more transparent in the world, the more we will see that what we are cultivating is sincerity. When we operate from a place of sincerity, we cannot go wrong. It is impossible to take a wrong turn with sincerity as our compass. Any apparent mistake will simply become part of the alchemical process. It will be transmuted because our primary investment, our core motivation, is truth. And that motivation will always lead, one way or another, back to sovereignty and the middle path. It does not matter if the path ahead looks dark or if it looks light. Sincerity transcends that duality. So, the ultimate truth behind the middle path is that the extremes, one oriented in spirit and the other in matter, are both, at their core, sophisticated forms of denial. The middle way represents the healing of that denial, the mending of that deep fracture within the psyche. It is about cultivating profound sincerity and unwavering truth. I hope this exploration has brought you closer to your own center, to the middle way within. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more higher dimensional guidance to assist you on your journey of spiritual awakening. I will see you in the next one.